Hi, I'm Rebecca Balcárcel with Writers on Writing. Let's talk with Alberto Rios, poet, author, and educator. I'm wondering if you would tell us about a particular technique that you tend to use a lot. And I mean, students often have to identify, like, oh, look, the poet used a metaphor or personification. Do you like set out to, like, this needs a metaphor right here? Or is it a little
No,
more organic?
it doesn't work like that. However, I do use a couple of techniques that are mine now. I mean, after all of these years, and one is I capitalize the first letter of every line, which is an old school, very old school, and very traditional way to do it. That has lost favor starting with the '60s and after that. But I do it for very particular reasons that are important to me, starting with the idea that if I'm going to capitalize it, it's the beginning of a new thought.
Mm.
It doesn't matter if it's connected to what's above. It doesn't matter if it by itself needs to say something. And so it's like launching a ship away from the shore, right? Every time I've got to do that work. I don't get any, I can't, it's the ship isn't already out there. I've got to launch it every time. And that grounds me, right? It says, what am I doing? What am I saying here? It doesn't let me say, what am I going to continue saying? Or what am I about to say? But the work of right then,
Mhm.
that's what that capitalizing does. I don't think anybody else has to capitalize their lines, but that's one thing it does for me. The second thing is I now generally work in couplets. And I work in couplets largely because I think two things create a third, that blank space in
Ah,
between, so that the poem is also saying something along with me. There's a Greek chorus behind me, right? And it's saying something whether we hear it or not, or whether we see it or not, whether we palpably know that it's there or not. Physically, it's there. There is space that
wow.
slows me down. That's one thing. It
I
slows
love
me
that.
down. Also, in a way, it is an homage to my parents.
Mm,
It's just two things: creating a me that is that blank middle, that blank thing, right? It is. My parents were a great love story, and
mhm,
I don't know how to honor that except that I have found this way to encode it into my work. And
mm.
my mother was not my father. My father was not my mother, but together something good could happen, right? And so I think of it as a writing conceptuality, right? A concept that is mine and that I'm aware of. It doesn't mean, it doesn't tell me content. It just
Right.
gives me form.
Mm,
So like somebody else might write a sonnet or somebody else might write, sestina or whatever. This is me. This is my voice and my life speaking to the form of the page and speaking what I want to say, how I want to say it, with the patience it needs to be expressed with. And
wow.
I think those things matter. So in terms of stylistics, what I think is great for that is that it gives me some musculature
Mm,
to start with. It helps me to know that I'm going to write something that if my poem were made of porcelain and it fell on the ground and broke into its lines, I wouldn't have to worry about them. They could take care of themselves. Every line should be able to go get a job in another poem, right? There's a saying in Spanish, his face was his resume. Right? They should be able to take care of themselves. Charles Simic,
Line.
many years, he just recently passed away. I'm very sorry to say. Charlie wrote a poem many years ago called "Bestiary for the Fingers of My Right Hand," and I've never forgotten it because what I love about it, he ascribes different things to different fingers, and when he gets to the thumb, he says the thumb. I'm just generalizing, paraphrasing. He said the thumb, if it gets cut off, don't worry about it. It's tough. It's strong. It'll take care of itself. It'll go hunting with the wolves. Now, what I love about it, of course, is the characterization of the thumb. But what I love more than that, and this is very Latin American in its sensibility, is the idea of a life in things.
Yeah.
Okay, and we can talk about that. But the thumb, when it gets cut off, at that moment, if you were an English writer, or, an American writer, however we want to say it, you would go, ouch. If that thumb gets cut off, me, right? Ouch.
Yeah.
It hurts. But instead, he goes with the thumb.
Its own life.
A whole other order of business, a whole other kind of life inherent in that, as opposed to staying with the I, which I have always, I didn't, when I first read that, I didn't know why I loved it. And it took me a while to sort that out, but I get it. And I've got poems now where I find myself doing that, but I don't set out to do that. It is simply the lesson of my culture, whatever my culture is. It's a mixed up culture. I come from various cultures, but from my father's culture, it is a sense that there is an inherent life in everything, And so if I take this pen and I drop it in English, I'm going to say I dropped the pen. I, front of the sentence, capitalized.
Yeah.
Rugged individualism in its
Right.
smallest incarnation in language. I did it. What did I do? I dropped the who cares end of the sentence. The pen could have been anything. I did it. And if you take that same moment, and this is a profound difference, cultural difference, and it has reverberations in different mindsets throughout the world. If you take this in a Romance language, Spanish, for example, you would take that same very basic moment, that action, and you would say something closer to, oh, se me cayó la pluma. Don't look at me. Look at the pen.
The pen.
We're both there. The pen, it fell from me. Did I drop it? Maybe. Did it want to fall? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not God. I don't control the world. I don't know what's, I don't know. Yeah. I am still in awe of the world. And it means that, it's rugged pluralism in its smallest incarnation in language. We're all in it together, including the things of the world, not just the I, but everything. And in that sense, that things can have action, can have moment, can have being, can have, thumb adventures is very believable if we have an appreciation of the magnificence of the world and all of the vibrancy, within it. So I work with that as a ground, as a foundation. I don't write to that. I just trust that it's going to surface whenever it surfaces, and it does. And I don't try to think that way, but it shows itself, and I'm glad that it does. I because it's in me.
It reminds me of my father's from Guatemala, and he actually worries about objects like having enough room to breathe. It bothers him to put objects in dark, close, cut off spaces where he wouldn't want to be. He's like, no, we need to, let it have air or whatever. And there's this profound personification going on. But it, like you said, it's a reverence for life in a larger sense, life like with a capital L instead of always just self-referential. That has,
as teachers of poetry and so on, we so often characterize personification as an error or as something not to do, right? That we discourage people from talking in the voice of the horse or whatever. I mean, they can. We do it. I mean, it's perfectly fine. But you know what I mean. We think of those moments. Personification is, on the left side of things, if you want, if you will, and not an immediate, you know, gold star. And so often we characterize it as something in error, or you can't do that.
You're not allowed to,
The
yeah.
world is not crying because of you.
Yeah.
But what I think we need to sort out there is it's the I that is making that, as opposed to, it's not that the world can't cry because of you. It can, but you can't assert that, and because it's just you and you're special. So
Uh-huh.
I think some work in sorting that out is valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
There's a wonderful moment, in a book called Pedro Paramo, uh,
Mm.
one of the quintessential books in Latin America, by Juan Rulfo. And I can't give you a better example. But if we say, in English and in English thought, it's like an airplane taking off. I'm feeling bad, therefore the world is crying. It's crying because of me, right? And in Juan Rulfo, there's this wonderful moment where a person says, "Oh, somebody such and such in whatever faraway town died," and then the character says next, "My shoulder is hurting."
Ah,
It's like an airplane landing, right? Because of the world, I hurt.
I heard.
The
Ah,
word, right? It's a different way to think about that movement, and
yeah,
what is central. You know what I mean? And
entirely. Yeah.
and I think that's a one of the hallmarks of Latin American thought
Hmm.
is that idea that we're in it together. It's too easy to say community because there's so much disagreement in community, and so, but we're in it together. Community has a
Yeah.
sense that everybody agrees with each other, and
Hmm.
that's not what I mean. We're
No.
in it together, and
Hmm.
I think so. In Latin American thought, for example, and these are things that I write from. I don't know that they're always obvious. Certainly, I don't try to make them obvious, but there are other ways to be related. For example, uh, uh, if somebody comes up to me after a reading, and this happens so often if I'm giving readings where, and somebody comes up to me and says, "Órale, tocayo," I know that that person's first name is Alberto.
Ah.
Tocayo is a word of relationship. It can be tocaya as well.
Uh-huh.
It's a word, it's like your first cousins by virtue of first names. You've grown up with that same, not burden, but that same name, and therefore certain experiences will have happened to you that won't have happened to other people. And in
Mhm.
that sense, you are related. And
Yeah.
it's a community, or we're all in it together kind of thing. But here's one way we're different. It's first name.
Hmm.
It's not simply birth. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and so I think there are lots of ways of thinking like that, and the I referential is diminished
Hmm.
in all of that, and that's true around the world. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's something like 33% of the languages in the world don't have an I referential, including, I mean, it's harder to know what by I mean, I went to the store, I did this.
Hmm.
Even in Spanish, the Romance languages, you don't have to say yo voy a la tienda. You get
No.
over yourself, man. Voy a la
Boy.
tienda. It implies the I, and you don't need to say it, and really literally get over yourself.
Truly.
And
Yeah.
so I think that starts to teach us something about, what is the human story, and how do we emerge from it, if
Yeah.
not with each other.
Yeah. And it's so varied, and that variation is enriching. Uh, I love how you talked about your couplets and that white space between them.
Mhm.
It's letting some silence or some result or some response happen
Mhm.
there is such an interesting idea. um I, and the fact that the two somehow produce this
Yeah,
mm,
and in that
pause.
way, it's not anything like an erasure, right?
No.
The fact that you might not see it, it's the opposite of an erasure. It's a creation. It's a creature that
Yes.
that we is palpably there, but doesn't have words.
Hmm.
No, it's just, and it's something going on behind the, it's like the Wizard of Oz behind the screen.
Uh-huh.
This is for me. It's not for everybody, right?
Yeah.
For me, but there's something going on, and
Hmm.
it helps me to understand that this is important what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
finding a new vocabulary and creating a new dictionary,
Hmm. Mm.
of those best words,
Yeah.
even if there's no way to spell them.
Ah,